Double Primer is back-to-back conversations with someone passionate about their work and passionate about someone else's work. Mostly art and mostly Atlanta. I'm your host, Sean Mills.
If a baker's dozen is 12 or 13 and a gross is a dozen, 144, what would you guys say a baker's gross is?
105.
It would be like 13 13s, whatever that is.
Okay. So, Jared, you say like 13 13s, and what was your answer, Tanju?
145.
145? Yeah, okay.
Plus one.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if it would interest you to hear this, but like another answer I've heard was 156. Like a dozen plus an extra dozen.
Oh, geez.
Okay.
Could you pick? Does that sound possible to you?
I could see that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So like, there is no answer. It's just like a kind of thought exercise of like how do you combine those two concepts, right? But like the history of it is kind of interesting because a baker's dozen is supposedly the theory goes that people would get fined for shorting their customers. Like if you only gave them 11 eggs, like the king would like throw you in prison, right? So rather than risk that, you would throw an extra egg in there just to be safe because worst case scenario, they get an extra egg, you have a happy customer, right? The gross thing is often used in merchandising. So it's kind of almost very specific that if I ask for a gross of scarves, I want to make sure I have exactly that many. And since you're like supply side, you wouldn't want to give away extra scarves, right? So those are just some like history of like sales concepts that I kind of combine into that like riddle.
Yeah.
So, fun fact, 13 raised to the power of 13 is like million, I think 302 trillion, I think. I got that number right.
Oh, is that
hard
like,
to count all
is there a name for that?
302, I don't know. No, I just, even like doing it on a calculator, it's like, wow, okay, that's 1,000, a million, a billion.
I think it's a gross baker.
Yeah.
Welcome to Double Primer episode 33, recorded on February 13th, the day before Valentine's Day. I'm your host, Sean, joined by Tanju, and today we have a special guest, Jared Oldham. Thanks for coming,
Hello.
guys.
Hey.
So, what's trending in your world?
Pose that to our guest, Jared, today, right? What's trending in your
it's on to me.
sphere of influence? Yeah.
So the main big thing that's kind of in my orbit, my orbit being mostly video games. I work in video games. I play a lot of video games. So, but a new game dropped last week called Apex Legends, and it is just like it came out of nowhere. It wasn't announced. It dropped just like out of the blue, and immediately was like breaking records for concurrent users. It's like on the top of Twitch, which is a video game streaming platform. It's just all over the place, and I mean, it's been funny at work. Again, I work at an esports broadcasting studio, and so it's just like all of us are just flabbergasted by it. They're already running like tournaments for it that are like, like grand prize like $50,000 for these tournaments, and it's just like the game's been out a week. Wow. It's awesome. Insane.
So I got the 14-year-old reaction from my kid.
Yeah.
Share. So I guess now that you mentioned it, it did show up on my radar as well. So I'm not. I appreciate video games, but certainly wouldn't call myself a gamer. But my kid's PlayStation account is actually my account. I guess PlayStation, you have to be an adult, right? So
yeah.
It's linked to mine. It's a big pain in the butt. So I get the email notification that he purchased the game for $0. So that was normal. So that caught my eye. I blew it off. And then I got home, and then I do like to kind of play the dad joke card on my son and like make like ridiculous comments about the games he's playing. So for like when Fortnite came out, I was like, what? Dude, is this Minecraft? Because they were running around with the axe, like just, like so his friends can hear it. No, Dad, no. So he's running around with that. I was like, what is that game with the nuclear eject? Is that the nuclear eject game with the, that was a game a few years ago that it kind of had a slightly resemblance to that. He's like, no, whatever, right? He's like trying to kicking me out of the rib. And then the next day or two, it popped up on my Twitter feed that Apex Legend was breaking records.
Yeah.
So I asked him about it later on. I was like, hey, you're playing Apex the other night. That's a big deal. He's like, yeah, so what?
It's not a big deal to him.
Like, I think it was a big deal, but he just didn't want it. Just the fact that I was asking him, he just wanted to be like, whatever.
Oh, right.
You know.
All right, the 14-year-old.
Yeah, you're not supposed to be paying attention to this stuff.
Yeah.
This webcomic named Drew, who does Toothpaste for Dinner, he always busts his kids' chops by calling his Minecraft computer Legos, even though he's very aware that it's called Minecraft. So, like, for people who don't know what we're talking about, I've heard it compared to Overwatch meets PUBG. Is that, like, the way the actual game play is?
That's pretty fair. It's the same people that made Titanfall and Titanfall 2.
Oh, it is. See, there you go.
Yeah, so your nuclear eject game, that's not wrong, actually.
All right.
There's also like a bit of a fool's gold possibility whenever like a big game comes out like this, because they'll pay like Twitch users to like play it to like get people to like it gets it trending, and so these things trend. Like that's not the hard part, you know. If you have the money, you can like have a tournament and you can host it, but like the issue is like, is it going to take off?
Exactly.
That's the developers promoting it. You're saying?
Yeah.
The developers promote it as hosting tournaments and things.
Yeah, so they'll give like some of the higher tier Twitch streamers like access to the game, and like basically give them a certain amount of money to play it and stream it for a certain amount of time, right? And so it's kind of creating that trend. But once that runs out, which is usually like the first week or so, with this one being like a very narrow launch window, is really only probably the first couple of days, but the numbers have been consistent even after that period. So
cool.
Also, it's just really fun to play.
It's a bit like the movie industry, right? Where it's like the first week is whatever. It's like to see the drop-off numbers the second week. That's kind of where you can kind of see whether this is like real or not.
Yeah, you get to see what has legs, right?
So like Tanju, what's your inspiration this week?
So this is actually a little, I think it's a mini poem. Might not even technically be a poem, but it sounds like a poem to me. By an Irish author from the 1920s and 30s named Brendan Behan. It's called Never Throw Stones. You guys ever heard it at all?
I hadn't before you suggested it. I looked it up.
So I got to pull it up. So I'll just read it out loud, and then we can noodle on it a little bit. I think this is really cool because Brendan Behan was born in February 1923, wrote, "Never throw stones at your mother. You'll be sorry for it when she's dead. Never throw stones at your mother. Throw bricks at your father instead." And having a dad of my own and now being a father, like this one really resonates with me.
So what did your dad do to you?
Oh man,
that's a big question.
Yeah, that's a long, multi-episode. I should we get into.
So sorry, like that was a joke, but like, so how did you come across this, and why is it interesting to you?
So, again, like a lot of things, I don't look for poetry. I don't like seek out poetry, but occasionally I'll stumble across it, and I do like it, like poetry in general, kind of in small doses. So this one I heard, I heard it a couple years ago actually, and it struck with me, and I actually have a little journal notepad that I keep, and I actually made a note of it. And then apparently, because this was something that came up recently, because Brendan Behan's birthday was, I think, over the weekend, February 9th or something, in 1923, it popped back up as I heard it currently, right? Somebody else referenced it, where it was like, on this day, Brendan Behan was born. Apparently, Brendan Behan was a playwright and author. So this was, I think, a little snippet out of one of his stories. that's kind of, I think, resonated with a lot of people, because when I Google it, you can actually find it fairly quickly, kind of as a standalone. He's an Irish playwright and novelist. So yeah, that, I think it popped up again because of his birthday. I think this is probably a better one for around Father's Day, but now we've definitely had a little bit of some drama here at home that, I don't know, being a dad is just hard in general. And now my dad's getting old. He's having some health issues, so there's some stuff came up about that recently. My father-in-law is also having health issues, so these things have all kind of been on my mind recently as well. And yeah, definitely, I think mothers are much more nurturing than fathers, right? So you don't want to hurt your mom, but your dad's kind of a pain. I know I'm a pain to my kids, and things just being kind of like that blocky brick thing is just kind of cool.
So if we unpack that, like, the idea is that you'll never regret being nice to your mom, but you'll never regret being mean to your dad. Is that
something like that?
Is that true?
I think it's more of like, you'll definitely regret being mean to your mom, right? But I don't think you might not necessarily regret being mean to your dad, especially for, kind of the analogy of throwing stones and throwing bricks, right?
You don't have to be mean to anybody.
Don't. But I don't know, there's something about dads that gets under your skin, right?
Yeah. Well, okay, so I had a couple kind of reactions to this, and one is that there's a history of these things, like, I guess some people call them epigrams, but, like, I had the reference last week, Jared, that there's this cliche that your English teacher tells you, Shakespeare was the first rapper, or Eminem's a poet, right?
Right.
Well, around, like, the time pre-industrial era, the first tweets were these little epigrams, and people would write them as almost like, if you like this, maybe you'll like my book. And so, like, there was, like, a culture of trying to write epigrams, and I remember there was a famous one called The Purple Cow. Have you ever heard of that one, Tanju?
No, I've never heard that.
I feel like I've heard of it.
Yeah, this is a guy named Gillette Burgess. His was, I never saw a purple cow, I never hoped to see one, but I can tell you anyhow, I'd rather see than be one. And it was so famous that it overshadowed the fame of his actual, like, writing, and he was, like, upset about it.
And now it's been I just Googled purple cow, and it's completely overtaken by, like, marketing.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Businesses, transform your business, and, like, Seth
crazy.
Godin reference.
Yeah, he wrote up a following, which was, yes, I wrote The Purple Cow, I wish I never wrote it, but I can tell you anyhow, I'll kill the man who quotes it.
If only he was alive today to see what it's become.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Probably hate it even more.
Oh, and then so, like, the other thing is, you said this guy was Irish, which could just be, like, a factoid, but there's actually a kind of interesting relationship with bricks for Irishmen in particular.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so, like, in America, racistly, they used to call bricks Irish confetti. The idea being that they would throw them, like, in a fight. And, like, brick bats were something. Like, you would grab a brick as a bat. It was, like, your weapon, because it's just free building material lying around. So if you get in a fight, grab a brick bat. So it's not just accidental that I think that he picked brick as the word.
Yeah, it's got the whole thing's got an Irish vibe to it, I think.
Mm-hmm. And you could picture, like, something, you share this poem, like, in a pub.
Yeah.
Have you heard the one about the mom and the dad?
I don't think I'd tell it as a joke. I would think about it more of like somebody comes in whining or venting, right, about their mom or something, right? And somebody could sort of, like, as a, like, wise little quote or something, kind of get you something to get your mind off of it, or be like, whatever, right?
Kind of like before you go bad-mouthing your mom, think about it.
Yeah,
like that, right?
Yeah, or think, surely there's probably more you could badmouth your dad about, too, right? Like,
Well,
redirect you.
Jared touched on it, but like, should we go there? Is this like, is it sexist? Like, does it actually not track? You know, like, because like the idea is that, you know, your dad, he can take it, but like your mom, she's like softer or something.
Like, I've been a dad for a while now, and I know this is probably going to get me in trouble for saying this and saying that recordingly. I'm recording it, but like being a dad, I found being like I'm an engaged dad, and that's freaking hard. And there's definitely been times where I'm like, I could totally understand why dudes run away. Like, like dads, like there's dads that run away, right? Like you could run away from it, and life moves on. Where it's a lot more difficult, and I think worse if a mother abandons their kids than like if a father abandons their kids, right?
It seems so perfectly topical because Jared has some news. If you want to share.
It's old news at this point. No, we're expecting a kid next month. So I've got that to look forward to as well.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. It's you know, it's all those things. It's exciting, it's terrifying, it's all that stuff, but yeah, I'm hoping I'm glad that you identify yourself as an engaged dad, because that's what I hope to be as well, because
Cool.
it's so easy to not be.
Yeah. I mean, I think you find the full spectrum.
Yeah.
Something that I've seen come up with dads, like I have a cousin whose dad like did do the runaway thing, and he really objected to this ad campaign. They have these on TV where they're kind of talking about like being a good dad, just be there. That's it. Just try it. And he was like, he took exception to that because it's like the bar seems to be so low for dads.
Yeah.
Like it's like, be a bad dad, just be around. And it's like,
it is a weird thing. It is a weird thing. Like when you look at, I mean, the microcosm that I always go to as far as like the marketing of it is Father's Day cards. And like, I mean, greeting cards in general are terrible. But like, if you go try and shop for a Father's Day card, it's all just nothing but getting drunk or being terrible at repairs or farting all the time. And like, apparently that's the only thing people associate with fatherhood.
Yeah, I don't know.
But on the other hand, I guess like all mothers want to do is drink wine all the time. If you're looking at greeting cards, so I don't know. It kind of goes back to Sean, what you were kind of touching on a bit. Like, is it sexist? It's just this weird dichotomy of like, I don't want to say gender roles, but just like those sort of domestic roles and how people see them. It's just strange.
They're cliche, right?
Yeah.
Or kind of lowest common denominator type of vibe to them.
But I think, too, which is why I'm kind of interested in that, is that it's not just about that it's sexist, but that finding where the actual problem lies, which is why I was kind of thinking that if I see a quote-unquote problem, it's not that, like, we're not hitting our dads enough. It's that, like, the expectation is that for dads is so low that they become mean guys, and then we don't feel guilty about throwing bricks at them, right?
Yeah, it's like, well, at least they're here, right? Like,
yeah. So it's like, it's a call to dads to be better. And so, like, when you read that poem and you say you relate to it, isn't your takeaway that it's like, I want to be the kind of dad that my kids don't want to throw bricks at? Or is that just like, no, not really?
I'm actually like, that's what I'm here for. That's part of like, yeah. That's someone like I've been dealing with. I got teenagers now, right? So they're me trying to be. They're throwing bricks at me for me even just trying to be interested in stuff that they're into, right? So it's like this weird. Like I'm always like, okay, am I? Because there's also we've kind of moved in this era where there's like the whole helicopter parent, which I don't try to be that way, but I probably can't help it sometimes. Kind of the culture we're currently in. But yeah, they're like throwing bricks at me for stuff where like I think I'm doing a good job at something, and it's like, dang. Yeah. But no, that's part of, I think, people got to vent sometimes too. And we talk about this with my wife a lot, that especially with the teenagers, we're like, well, at least they feel comfortable enough saying like really mean things to us to vent, right? As they're venting or dealing with some of their challenges that they're facing, versus like keeping it all pent up and not expressing that at all.
True.
Right? Because they don't really know sometimes like whether they're being hurtful or not. So I think that comes with experience. So,
well, once again, treating this like a riddle as opposed to just a complete joke. I like picture like if your wife or your daughter read this poem, what would they take away from it? And the idea is that you're saying they should buy you a helmet, not take the brick out of your son's hand.
No, I don't know. That's a good one. I have to be strategic about bringing it up.
It's like your job is to be good at dodging bricks, and his job is to throwing them.
Yeah.
Another way you could even look at it is like almost kind of a protector role, where like, the father is just deflecting onto himself instead of like, the mother's already been through enough,
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Carrying the kid for that long and all that, and it's like this is kind of the father's chance to just like, look, if you want to throw stones, throw them at me. She's already put in her time, right? Like,
so what Jared's referring to is the Dark Knight paradox, that you must be the hero that we deserve, that we need, not the hero we deserve.
Exactly.
He'll run because he can take it.
He can take it.
Yeah, no, there's that. I was just thinking too when you were saying that, Jared, is you could also have where like your kid is throwing bricks, figurative bricks at something externally, right? That could cause him or her to get into more trouble or cause more damage,
right?
Or destroy some other relationship out there that could potentially be directed at, again, sort of taking the hit so that they can get that off of them and be able to move on.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. I thought this would be kind of a fun one to see where we ended up going with it. Maybe we revisit
all over the place.
Father's Day later this year.
Epigrammatically, do you think it makes you want to like find more of this guy's work, or it's like you got everything you wanted out of him, leave it alone?
I don't know, he's like a player. I don't know. We'll see. I'll definitely be curious, but again, I don't make reading a priority in my life, unfortunately. So it's sort of like, if I stumble across it, it'll be cool or recognize his name. I also think too, you mentioned the epigram and even like kind of sexism and stuff. I suspect that if he wrote something similar today, it wouldn't be taken as well or have as much longevity as having written it.
That's a good point.
Roughly 100 years ago.
Well, he might still be popular, but he'd just be like Bill Hicks or Bill Burr, and like he'd have to be able to.
Just a random thing out there. No, and I have tried like listening to poetry, or I don't know if it's WRK, like Georgia Tech Radio or Georgia State Radio. One of them has a poetry show on like Sunday mornings that they broadcast that I've tried listening to, and it's like, okay, the first couple minutes is cool, but then it's like, I'm just done, right? Like I can't, I remember in high school trying to go into like little mini poetry slams at some cafe in the city. Like, it was kind of cool, but just really didn't.
Yeah, it's Georgia State's radio, by the way. It's
Georgia State, yeah. Yeah, it's kind of cool when I stumble across. It's like, oh yeah, it's like the poetry hour, whatever they call it, poetry jam, and it's kind of cool for a few minutes.
Yeah,
it's actually where I do listen to it. I'm a little hesitant to say because of the recent Me Too movement fiasco that's been going on for a couple years, right? Men getting called out, but on NPR they had Garrison Keillor had the Writer's Almanac. Mm-hmm. That's like a little 5-minute snippet of some poetry and writing that I really liked until Garrison Keillor got accused.
Yeah.
So, I think he got called out on it, right? I think it's more than an accusation. With the Me Too movement and of potential sexual assault. So they stopped that, or I guess his contract with the distributor, it wasn't NPR directly, it was some affiliate of NPR. So they cut that contract, so for about 6 months or so that was off the air. while he was dealing with the situation, and then it's not on the air anymore. But now in the age of podcasts, I found that it's actually he's self-publishing it.
Oh,
Writer's Almanac. So that comes up, and that's where I heard this recently. Right, it was on the Almanac for February 9th or whatever, February 10th, whatever it was, and it was like, because at the Writer's Almanac he'll highlight like one or two authors or somebody who had a birthday that day or who died or had something notable, and then they'll usually end it with a poem or something.
Yeah, like it's a running joke, Jared, that all of Tanju's heroes are getting taken down by one. He respected like Louis C.K.'s work ethic, and then the next week he got like put on the.
That was funny because my wife's like, "I can't believe you brought that up. What's wrong with you?" I was like, "Clueless. I'm sorry. Like I didn't realize."
I mean, that's like everybody respected Louis C.K.'s work ethic, and then that came out, and it doesn't negate that.
And then when he bought Enzi's and Sorry tickets, it took it to a whole nother level.
Yeah, right.
I think what I got.
Thanks for examining things, but it doesn't take away like that one aspect that you respected about it, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Now, what I got called out on was that I brought it up after this had all come to light, and I didn't even mention anything about it because just off topic. But I was surprised because Garrison Keillor also did that. I never liked this show, the Prairie Home Companion or whatever that thing was called.
I never got into that either.
I didn't like that, but it was like, God, that guy sounded so nerdy and dorky. Like I can't, and it just goes to show, like any man out there is capable, right, of behaving poorly.
It's true.
Yeah, like speaking of dads, like I thought of Garrison Keillor as like dad radio, like it was like for dads by dads, like
absolutely.
Yeah, that's about my attention span when it comes to that kind of content as well. So,
well, speaking of attention span, I'm going to go ahead and enlist our guest Jared to help me talk about this. But the thing I wanted to kind of discuss to this week was the process of using digital photography in painting, which is a pretty big topic, but it's something that like I think is continuing to be an evolving art form in and of itself. So just to give like a big like sweeping overview for context, I was going to say that what people think about as like photography assisted painting kind of even goes back before cameras were invented, and I could hear you thinking, how is that even possible, right?
I was thinking exactly.
This is some of your work that you use digital photos or photography.
Yeah.
Part of your painting process or
Absolutely.
in your painting directly?
Almost exclusively. Yeah. I don't think I've painted like a still life since college. So like what I'm referring to is that people have found through research that many like Renaissance artists, obviously before cameras were invented or in wide use, used a system of mirrors that basically projected like a scene onto their canvas.
Right.
So like essentially,
right?
Exactly. So it sort of was the same sort of process, regardless of whether it was a printout or a physical reflection. Right. It does the task of projecting the image for the spatial relationships, and it's up to you to generate the paint.
Okay. So
like that's one thing I love to disabuse like students of, is the fact that this isn't cheating. It was almost since the inception of painting.
Oh, that's awesome. That actually makes you feel really good, because that's what I've been doing with Inkscape and some of the projects I've been involved with. Like even that Greyhounds in the Desert that we talked about a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
I actually traced a photo my dad took in the desert of a desert landscape within Inkscape, right? And it changed it quite a bit, but I used his photo directly as the starting point.
And the fact that you actually know like the photographer, like that's more authorship than many artists
Yeah, that's
have.
exactly how I was like, I was even rationalizing it to myself. Well, at least it's my dad's pick, and it's not just a random pick I pilfered off the web. Because I did do an image search first, right, to sort of find the one that kind of had the composition I was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
But it's funny too, because I also felt like, I don't want to say it was like I was sort of keeping that quiet, right? That's what I had done. Because I don't know, I wasn't. It did feel a little bit like cheating, or perhaps people when it might be looked down upon or something, right?
Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I don't know if this muddies the waters, but I think it's so interesting I want to share it, that, okay, go back even farther. Like, the very first art and paintings people made were in cave walls, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
you can picture those paintings on, like, the
Sure.
cave wall of, like, a bison or whatever. So this isn't exactly fully accepted, but there's, like, a very, like, promising theory that suggests that those cave paintings were projections as well. And, like, this is what's mind-blowing, is that they think that for some cavemen, they would go out in the bright sun and they would stare at, like, a bison, right? And then they would run into the cave where it was dark, and they would use the after image that was on their eye, and they would trace it on the cave wall.
Huh.
So,
How the
like,
heck could they?
well,
prove?
That's crazy.
They
I
absolutely.
mean, how do you prove it, right?
Yeah,
Like,
you can't prove it, but you can't prove evolution either. It's a theory that, like, you lay a good groundwork for, and then, like, either you accept it or you don't, you know?
Oh, no. I think with evolution, there's a lot of evidence that can be collapsed.
Oh, like, you're saying that there's no evidence for that. Like, you want a little bit more to tantalize you on that. So, like,
Yeah.
the theory is that, like, you could, like, I don't know if you've ever been to, like, Sidetrack, where they have all these games where it's like, stare at this apple, now look at here, and then, like, you can see optical after images very easily, right? So,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
so, like, based on, like, the shape, you know, if a scientist, like, you recreate it, like, stare at something, and then you try being in a cave or whatever, and,
Yeah.
and like part of the evidence, you're right to be skeptical, is that, like, oftentimes with these images they would see, like, a handprint on the wall. So like from that information you get, like, okay, where they were standing, the distance, like, you know, they extrapolated this. But anyway, that's just like the point of that is just to suggest that projection and that sort of assistance is something that's almost fundamental to painting. It's not a trick or a trap. From that, the big thing that photos do that has revolutionized us beyond after images or mirrors is what now people call HDR. Jared, do you want to jump in here? Can you explain what HDR is?
I don't remember what it stands for.
I think,
I
like,
kind of can explain it, but
yeah, high dynamic range. Does that?
okay. Yeah. It's the process itself is basically taking three. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah,
it's
you're on
basically
the right
like
track.
three different exposure layers of a photo. So you take a shot that's, like, way overexposed. You take a shot that's way underexposed, and then one that's kind of hitting that midline, I guess.
Exactly right.
And then you slam them together, and you can kind of play with your values because you have your extreme lights and you have your extreme darks, and so you can bring those out in different ways. Instead of just trying to do it all in one image, you can play with, like, your highlights popping a lot more than they would in, you know, a simple one exposure image that's, you know, a static f-stop and all that business.
Right. So, like, the idea is that you're getting more information than the human eye can see. Because,
Right.
as we all know, there's this threshold of whatever you're looking at, your eyes will focus. So, like, if it's a dark room, your pupils dilate. If you're outside, your pupils constrict, right? So, what cameras can do, and what they're even better at now because of computers, is that basically you're getting more information that you could possibly see with your naked eye. So you're getting extra details that you wouldn't have been seeing in the brightest parts, extra details you would have seen in the darkest parts. And so that's what photographs can do for us now. And once again, it's not entirely novel, because it used to be when people had film, they would do the same thing, but then they'd have to like superimpose the pictures in the darkroom, and they'd have to do all these kind of like, they'd have to cut two different pictures together to do it. But now with computers and digital photography, we can kind of do some of that stuff, quote unquote, automatically.
Right.
Does any of that sound familiar at all to you, Tanju, or does it sound like it does it track?
No. I've my dad's photographer, pro amateur photographer, so he turned me on to it a couple years ago. I guess I thought of it not as you can see more information than the human eye gets. It was like I thought it was you can capture more information than a single. Because if anything, a piece of film is much more limited than a human eye, right? What it captures, because of the aperture and the f-stop and the speed of the film, etc. So it can only capture so much. So this high dynamic range allowed you to capture more, which is actually I thought was the opposite. It was a little closer to more of the richness that you do pick up.
Right.
But to the point of the pupils dilating and stuff, I think that's a little bit more new information to me, but I makes sense like that. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, so, like, to take it out of just the purely theoretical, me and Jared kind of came up right as the transition was happening from film, where everywhere in your corner grocery store had a film developing center, to everyone was going to digital photography. And so we've lived through this revolution where it used to be like to get a 5 megapixel camera would cost you $1,000 to now you can get them at a gas station for $10 sometimes, like depending.
Or they're just in your phone already.
Right. So like that's another revolution is that not just access to tools, but free access essentially for everyone. So what used to be like you would have to like hire a photographer to take slides of your work. Now you can do it, like Jared said, like on your phone instantly. So like that's another revolution. And so like my first job at a school was working for a graphic design company that did sports media. So like funnily enough, like this HDR thing was like a fad in a way. Like you can probably picture it. There's like these images where basically you can take any tool and use it for good or use it for bad. And so like it's kind of a cliche now that when you use that HDR trick and you put every possible detail you can, it looks kind of hyper real. So like it was very popular to have like your wedding photos or like a football player where it's just like this really like every sinew, every line was visible, and like so now we're kind of post that now where people realize that's not like that doesn't necessarily look better. It was just sort of like an ostentatious display of ability.
Yeah, and you can use it intelligently, right? I think when people were using it in a good way, but then someone figured out how to just turn it into like a Photoshop filter, where it's as easy as, you hit a button and it's quote unquote HDR, and then people were just throwing it on everything the wrong way, and I think that's where it became oversaturated with it.
Right.
And I think now it's swung back to like, oh, you can actually make cool things with it.
Mm-hmm. And like what you just touched on about like Photoshop and filters, so like there's tons of algorithms that simulate what the apertures do. So like things like sharpen, they'll basically sort of try to guess, like they're saying like, oh, I kind of see a difference in contrast. This looks like a line, so I'm going to like exaggerate that line. And you'll often see that with like beginner photographers or just people playing around with their Photoshop or their phone filters, like that. You can kind of with a heavy hand get something that looks very like cheesy, basically.
Yeah.
But in my own process, like the 3-step thing. What I'm actually drawing from, I find it useful. Instead of, like you said, making it into one image, what I like to do is I'll take a image that I'm starting from, and I'll make one that's higher, like really has like a lot of information in the darks, a part that has a lot of information in the light parts, and then that midtone, and I'll switch between those 3 different photographs while I'm working. And then I get to decide as the artist, like where do I let the lines disappear and where do I want to bring them out? It puts the
is the photograph like on the side, like you're looking as a visual reference, or are you like printing out a photo and even painting on top of it or something like that.
Yeah, so for me, my process is that since I was born into the digital revolution, I'm very comfortable using a computer screen. So I'll have like 3 files on my desktop, and I'll switch between them, and I'll zoom in dynamically in and out as I'm doing it, as I need the details, or sometimes I'll even zoom really far out to make sure that I'm blocking in broad colors without I can't even see the details yet. And to tie it into a personal case, there's a maker at the Maker Station. She's a painter, and she paints in a very hyper-realistic style. And so for her process, she just prints the picture because she's very uncomfortable with the idea of the light of the screen kind of affecting the color values. So that's kind of also a personal thing. This would be a good chance for you, Jared. Like, what are some of the ways that you work from photographs or have in the past?
Probably not too dissimilar from yours, at least in other conversations that we've had about it. To me, the biggest strength in it is, especially like in being able to manipulate it, like in something like Photoshop, is like you're not too terribly limited like on poses for like your subjects and your models or whatever. I mean, working from a reference is great, but you know, if the moment's gone, or you know, you don't have access to that model anymore, or if it was you and you just don't feel like posing anymore, you know, you're able to manipulate the photo in such a way where you can get the pose right, and while it looks like as a photo, it looks completely horrendous. You can translate that into a different medium, like if you're drawing or if you're painting or whatever. Like, you can at least see the proportions. You can at least see like the directions that you want things to go. That's the most that in my experience, that's where I get the most benefit out of it. Is just having that control over, you know, over your subject, and not being stuck with like, well, I wanted it more like a little bit tweaked to that way, but this is what I got to work with, you know.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point, tangentially, I think, there, because you were talking about how, like, you're not even limited to one photo. You can, like, look at multiple. Like, you could look at one for the pose, and then you could look at another pose or another picture for the background. And I was just going to share this revolution, too, Tanju. Even from, like, one generation of artists previously, there used to be, like, one of the things you did, or a coveted thing you had as a resource, was, like, you would build up files of photos, like, you would like maybe find them in magazines or whatever. It's like, well, if I ever need to draw a panda, I guess I'll keep this panda picture around. Now we have Google, or like in the past, like there would be a thing where you would have to like have a license to like look at the library of a local magazine company, or that you would like need to go to the library. But like now, everyone just has all these resources, just gaudy amounts.
It's amazing the amount of we have access to. It blows my mind.
It's overwhelming at times. Like, even if like you are looking for something as a reference, I mean, you'll get bogged down, or at least I will. I'll just get bogged down just looking for a reference for hours. I'm like, well, now I don't even feel like doing the project anymore.
Yeah, and
totally.
Like, picture just as a workflow thing. So let's say I want to make a painting of my own cat. Like, so that's a subject I have infinite access to, as much as I can make it like pose for me, right? So, but like if I in the past, like just one generation ago, I say I'm lucky enough to afford a really good camera, and I have my own like dark room, or I can pay for it to be developed. I have to take a picture, wait for that film to be developed to even see if I got a good picture, right?
Yep.
And then I have to develop it whatever size I need to before I even have that to start. And now it's like, there's often, I'm sure, like Jared, you've had the same experience where it's like, maybe you're looking at a photo reference or something where you're like, well, I could just go take some extra photos in the time it would take me to find a good picture of a hand or something.
Yeah. Yeah, that's usually like that last resort is like, you know what, I'll just go do it myself. And then that's where like that manipulation comes into play, right? Because then it's even, you can spend even more time where like, I just took the picture myself, but then while you're looking at it, you're like, oh, but that should be up here, you know, like it's just endless.
So Jared, do you paint also, or draw, or both, or?
I draw. I am too scared to paint. I color digitally because there's undo buttons that way. But yeah, I like to draw and ink traditionally, but color like in Photoshop or something. But
Cool.
I remember me and Jared had a friend named Josh who he was wrestling with the fact that he was more of a painter than a digital artist, and he would always kind of say, the cool thing about painting for me is that if I trip, I'm not going to accidentally undo 3 hours of work. But then like the flip side of that is that like in one click of my mouse, I could put a filter on it and change like a painting that was red into blue, which would take him, a week of a drying, a week of a glazing, and then,
Yeah, for me, I'm more likely to trip and ruin hours of painting than I am to trip and undo something digitally.
That's true. So tell me if you guys have seen this or if you have a reaction. But so right now, like, because of the way the art world is, one of the trends is hyperrealism. So like one of the things that people will do to like impress people is they'll make these like gigantic paintings of like a face and with like water drops on it. And then like so like there's this thing of like I'm going to bowl you over with my technical ability and I'm going to make it's like wow. Yeah. That looks like a photograph. Like that's what they're aspiring to. Are you familiar with this trend, Tanju? Have you ever seen these kind of things?
I guess paintings.
Yeah, this trend of like hyper realist, like there'll be like a super blown out up close picture of like a sweat bead.
Come across it a little bit. Didn't maybe notice it as a trend specifically, but yeah.
So like
certainly come across it.
Yeah, like my take on it, I don't know if it's a hot take or not, is that like for artists there's this track that you start on and some people never get off of, which is that like when you're little you get a lot of praise for making something look like something. Mm-hmm. And so like you start like, oh, that looks like I can recognize that that's a person. Cha-ching, you get like a check mark. And then a little later it's like, oh, I recognize that. That's Steve, another check mark. And then like at some point you either say like, okay, matching a photograph to a like exacting amount is either the pinnacle to you or it's like the beginning of your story.
Yep.
Right.
So like for me, I kind of like see some of that work as being like very like it's certainly there's certainly talent, but I see it as like stunted, like Arrested Development almost.
Yeah, Arrested, or is that it's like the term sophomoric? Does that apply here?
Well, it depends on how mean you want to be. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny to hear references to like I guess it's more like directors or writers where their critics will call their work sophomoric, and I never really, not coming from the art world formally, like never quite understood what that meant, but wondered if that was sort of like an Arrested Development or they did good and they're trying to be formulaic and it didn't quite work out as well the second time because they're
right and like
stuck.
The issue, which is the tension, I think, is that like I used to do like some more abstract work when I was in school, and I had a friend who was a grad student who was like, I can't tell if that's abstract because you chose it or because like that's the best you can do, and it was like a real challenge. So like for years after that, I was like, well, I really need to make sure that my talent is on point so that I know I can answer for sure that this is a choice.
Yeah, right.
Right?
That's funny.
Yeah, I tend to fall on the same spectrum as you. I think like I really respect the talent of those like the hyper realist artists, but it's also kind of you come back to the point of like what are you really achieving, I guess, other than like, hey, you made it look like that, good job, that's about as deep as it goes. And maybe that's okay, but I kind of go back and forth on it myself.
And to share this with Tanju, because he didn't have this experience, so like it was a very real discussion whenever photography came around that is painting dead, like. And so, like, for some people, the answer is yes. Like, we're like, I'm getting everything I need from photos and graphic design. And then for other people, it's like, no, this is the birth of painting, because now we're freed from the shackles of, I just need to like paint the governor so we have a record of what the governor looks like.
Right.
I can paint how like the governor's wife makes me feel.
Might get you in trouble, but
Yeah.
but there's freedom.
Right.
And
for now.
And then even crazier, like to take it to another absurd level, I could paint how the governor's wife makes me feel on Twitch. I don't even sell the painting. People just donate like e-bucks or whatever. And there's not even a transaction, like theoretically. They're just like a fan of me creating. Yeah. Which is like, that's a new revolution that we could even go into deeper on another topic.
Yeah, so real quick, what is the currency on Twitch? Is it e-bucks or does it actually translate to real dollars?
So like, there's a range. So like, we're in the midst of them monetizing in every way they can. So like, Jared touched on one. There's like direct sponsorships. There's people who donate directly. There's people that have a personality and then have like a shop of clothing. So it's like any type of.
I was wondering, like within the Twitch platform itself, there is a way to donate, right?
Yeah. So like there is. Yeah. So there's like a coin basically that you buy with your real dollars, and then you can donate those coins. That's one of the ways.
The person receiving them can cash out those coins.
Yep.
For real dollars.
And if you hit a certain number of like subscribers to your channel, you can start monetizing that way. Similar to YouTube in that like once you hit a number of subscribers, you start making money directly from Twitch, like based on that number. So like, the more subscribers you're getting, you're monetizing that way too.
Cool. Yeah, I've yet to explore Twitch. I don't know if I'm too old for it or what.
It's pretty cool. I mean,
never too old.
No, there's a lot to be found there.
Cool.
It's primarily gaming, but I'll find people just live streaming, playing music on there, and I'll just
there's a prop maker here in the Atlanta area that's got a pretty big Twitch following.
Cool.
And Volpin Props, Harrison Cricks, I think is his last name. And then I know there's been some makers and maker spaces that have streamed stuff on Twitch, but I just haven't taken the time to watch in depth, right, or really get into it.
Well, we have Jared here. This is something really topical that came up that's kind of interesting to talk about, which was during the Super Bowl, one of the big splashes was that this gamer named Ninja, who's the biggest Fortnite streamer, was like in a Super Bowl commercial. So that was supposed to be like this like bellwether moment, like we're real, we're touching like reality.
Barely in it.
Yeah, and then so like, but the flip side of that was also they had him on like the New Year's Eve, and he did like a dance from the game, flossing, and like nobody did it with him, and so it was like that was his Icarus moment, like he went too far.
Yeah.
Well, I actually know someone who. It's one of those knows someone who knows someone, but tangentially knows Ninja, and I kind of heard his side of that New Year's Eve thing. That he spent basically the whole day telling the producer that he wasn't going to do that because he knew it was going to flop that hard.
Right.
But eventually it was just like they had already paid him, and NBC or whoever it was like, look, you have to do it. And so he was just kind of begrudgingly went out there and did his thing and then kind of walked off camera and said, see, I told you.
And like another controversy that came of that was that like Twitch sees this guy as like a potential spokesman for like the concept of Twitch, right? That like this is a potential opportunity for you to tell your grandpa that Twitch exists. So they were advertising on other people's Twitch channels who were streaming their own New Year's Eve broadcasts. Come check out Ninja on ABC or whatever. And so people were understandably very upset. It's like, you're using my platform to advertise to stop watching my thing. So that's another interesting internet thing where it's like we're relitigating things that we should have already figured out like through television, but like we're having to refight those same battles.
Because it's like the freshly minted NBAs get involved, right? Start pushing for these things, and they're kind of clueless, but driven by by chasing the dollars.
Yeah, well, like new media is just evolving so quickly. I think like everyone's kind of rushing to try and figure out what's okay and what isn't in that space.
Yeah, it just reminds me of I think it was like The Simpsons 300th episode or something. I had to stop watching The Simpsons, right, a few years ago. But they had the 300th episode and I watched that, and it was the one where the freshly minted MBAs get on Krusty the Clown show and say, hey, the data shows there's no girls that watch his show, and they need to throw unicorns and rainbows and whatever to increase the demographic. And Krusty's like Krusty, just whining and complaining about the freshly minted MBA screwing up his show and whatever. It's still, I think new media is still part of media it's all about people anyways, right? So it's just a lot of times the same old stuff.
Yep.
The same old emotions driving things.
Mm-hmm. And you never know what's going to kill the golden goose. So using that Krusty example, there's a documentary on Netflix called, I think, How Did They Get Made, about toys in the 80s. And one of the topics was He-Man. And they said He-Man had incredible market growth. It's they basically couldn't invent toys fast enough to sell them. But the thing that killed it was that they're like, oh, you know what would be good if we could also sell these to girls, and they make She-Ra.
Yep.
And it worked, but it worked like a Twilight Zone episode because the fact that She-Ra was so cool, it made the He-Mans what? There's a girl here that she's just as powerful as He-Man? Forget it. And that killed the boys wanting He-Man if She-Ra was just as powerful, which is sad, but it's they killed their goose.
Yeah, totally. Well, cool. So I don't know. I guess we're kind of coming up right on the hour here. Got my trusty clock up this time.
Oh yeah.
Watching the is it stopwatch? I guess I'm watching the stopwatch. Yeah. So I don't know. Should we move on? Go ahead and wrap up.
Yeah.
This week's.
Did you have something you fixed this week?
I did. It's not, I don't know if it's that interesting, other than it does tie back to the father experience too. So I did spend this past weekend, I don't like doing yard work, and I've, over the years, designed my life so I do less and less yard work. But I went ahead and bit the bullet and cut down and did a bunch of trimming of a bunch of the shrubbery out front. We had a big holly tree that's damaging our gutter, so I didn't fix the gutter. That's going to hire a professional for that one, but I did a bunch of prep work, probably long overdue, a couple years of overgrowth to fix the yard to get ready for that. So, got to use a chainsaw. I got my son out there. He was using some power tools with me. He was also not happy about it, but I could tell he did enjoy using the power tools, even if he wouldn't admit it, which was kind of cool.
One of Tanju's slogans has been, being a handy maker has taught him what he doesn't want to do himself. And so, knowing that the gutters are something he doesn't want to touch is a victory in itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We're moving to a new house this weekend, and that's on our list of things we have to do as well. So,
get gutters installed, or
yeah, we just have to clean the gutters, which is not as bad as installing new gutters, but still not great.
Yeah, it's dirty work for sure. Yeah, especially we got a damaged one, so I was like, okay, it'd probably take me 2 or 3 days, right, to get through the whole thing, or hire a pro out here, and he's probably going to knock it out in a couple hours.
Right.
Well, I'm definitely going to put your poem in the show notes since it's short enough that I can fit in there. Is there anything you want to plug, Jared, before we sign off?
I alluded to earlier, working for an esports broadcasting. Our season for the 2 games we managed, Smite and Paladins, both kick off next month on Mixer, actually, another streaming platform. So yeah, those will kick off early March.
How long does the season last? Is it a couple months?
We're changed things up this season. It's a straight 13-week season, I believe. And then we'll have a month or so off, and then it'll kick back up for the fall season, leading to the World Championship.
Do you guys own a piece of Mixer, or is that third party, I guess, or?
We do not. Mixer is owned by Microsoft, actually. So we partner with them.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So we'll keep an ear out for that in the next coming month. And thanks for coming on.
Hey,
Yeah,
thanks for having me.
joining us. All right. Talk again soon.
Yeah.
Find more information at doubleprimary.com.